Welcome to the step-by-step Don McCunn style pants draft. I am going to be working out of this book, the How to Make Sewing Patterns, second edition by Don McCunn, and I have printed out a very organized copy of my measurements. I highly recommend that step because while you're drafting, there's a lot of back and forth between following the instructions, looking for a measurement, putting it on the paper. So before we get started, some of the things you should have ready, I think, is a very organized chart that's easy to follow with all of your measurements on it. On this chart, I'm using it for all three methods that I'm sharing this month. And what I did was I put my actual measurements in the first column here, and then I added ease, and then I have them for the Jan Minot method. The interesting thing about the Don McCunn method is the front leg does not have any ease added to it. So I'll be working with my exact measurements for the front leg. When we get to the second leg, he adds a standard amount of ease. So you don't have to worry about adding ease and then quartering or halving your measurements. But I just want you to know, I think it's a really good idea to have a chart or some sort of organized list of your measurements. The other things that I think are really helpful is, this is like my favorite ruler. Look, I can almost reach out and touch you because it's a 48-inch ruler. That's the easiest way to get your vertical grain line in one shot, is to have a long straight edge. You can get these rulers in 48 inches or 36 inches. I think it's really helpful to have a long straight ruler. And then the thing that does the heavy lifting is this flimsy clear grid ruler. Okay, so this is an 18-inch clear grid ruler. I love it because it clearly shows the, even down to a 16th, eighth, half, quarter inch. And then the whole ruler itself is 2 inches wide. So if I need a 2-inch, amount when I add like fit allowances, very helpful. Then the other thing you're going to need is some sort of curve. And you don't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be fancy. I have the Fairgate Variform French curve. I also have the shorter Variform curved ruler. And in addition to that, you could get very easily, you can find sets of these plastic rulers too, but having a curved ruler is super helpful when you're trying to, smooth out and make a nice curved edge or a curved line. So I've got my curved rulers, I've got my 18-inch grid ruler. The other things that I think are important is you're going to be spending a lot of time making lines, so you want to have the right tool for that. For this tutorial, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be working with two different types of marking tools. So the first tool I'm going to use, and I think I'm just going to go with, maybe red. I love these friction stem pens because they feel like a pen, but they erase like a pencil. So the tip of the cap is an eraser, and then there's no buttons to push, and there's no way to, turn it on and off mistakenly, like some of those side buttons and all the other things. I just like this basic, stem pen. And then once I have locked in the line, and I'm 100% that I want it there and there's no mistake, I'm going to darken the line with a Sharpie so it's easy to see on camera. Another good option is the Velocity mechanical pencils. These do have, you have to push down for the lead, but the lead is really strong. It's the 0.7 lead. So I do like these. I'm not going to use this during the tutorial though, because fun fact, if you write with pencil and then you Sharpie over it, the lead messes up the tip of your Sharpie marker. So I'm not going to be Sharpie markering over pencil. I'm going to use the stem pen instead. So we're going to get started. This is step by step, start to finish, front back leg Don McCunn. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start with the front leg, and the first step is to mark your floor to waist measurement. Now my floor to waist measurement is 44.5 inches. So I am going to just draw myself a line down the center of this paper. And by the way, talking about the paper, that's another important thing. Notice I'm working with gridded paper or alphanumeric paper or dotted paper. Those are the three things that you can call this and find this online. The reason why I like this paper is because it makes it very easy for me to get a right angle, because it's full of square, it's a grid, and it's very easy to work with. You want to use the grid if you're going to use this paper. And what I mean by that is I'm going to draw my floor to waist line on this paper, and I'm going to do it on one of the gridded lines. That way, as I keep drafting, everything's going to look nice and square. If I take my ruler and just do this, you know what I mean, and just pop it on there and draw it crooked, my whole pattern is going to look crooked. So I'm starting out with a straight line, floor to waist, 44.5 inches. That's the first step. I'm going to start at this line right here, and I'm going to go to 44.5 inches. Actually, let me start here. Okay, so I'm going to go straight up. And because I'm working with this ruler, I can reach way over here and get my 44.5 is right here, and I can put a little mark right there and a little mark right here. So now I have my first step all set. This is my floor to waist. The next step is to draw a square line at the bottom, and this is referred to as the cuff line. So let's come in over here. I'm going to use my 18-inch grid ruler, and I'm starting at the bottom of my floor to waist line, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make a cuff line. Now the instructions are to mark it off and make it 4 inches long on either side of this floor to waist line. The other thing this line is it's the center of the leg. So at the cuff line, we're going to add 4 inches towards the side seam and 4 inches towards the inseam. So actually I should probably mark this. This is the center leg line. And I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to mark 4 inches here. And I'm going to measure 4 inches here. Okay, so this is my cuff line. All right. The next step, on this center line, we are going to measure up our floor to inseam length. Now my floor to inseam length is 33 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and take my ruler, and I'm just going to measure up 33 inches. So let's go ahead and measure up 33 inches, which is right here. So on this line, we're going to square a horizontal line as well. I'm just going to bring the paper to me so I'm not reaching across my table here. I'm going to go ahead and use my 18-inch grid ruler, and I'm going to square a line off of here. And I'm just going to draw a line that's, probably longer than I need. And actually, because I'm doing that, I'm going to use the red pen for now. So I'm just going to square this line off. And when I say square off, what I mean by that is we're making a right angle to the center line. And I'm just going to use a red pen like this. Okay, I think you can still see it, but I can erase if I don't need the total length. Now, what is this line? This is going to be your thigh line. So in the Don McCunn method, the top of the inseam is the thigh line. So I'm just going to label that thigh. And then of course we want to mark off 1/4 of the thigh measurement on both sides of this line. So my thigh measures 24 inches, so I'm going to go ahead and add 6 inches because 24 divided by 4 is 6. And notice no ease. I'm going to go ahead and just mark that like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I'm just going to put a little there. And I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so that's my thigh line, and I've got, and I'll just put here 1/4 thigh, 1/4 thigh. Okay, so I've got that. So the next step is to square off a line at the top of our floor to waist measurement line, or our center line. What do you think that is? I think it's the waistline. So we're gonna come up here and I'm gonna square a line off. And this measurement was 1/2 inch. You know, it was 44.5, so this top line is going to be in the middle of this grid, basically. This is why I like working with the gridded paper, because it really helps me draw everything nice and straight. So I'm going to go ahead and mark off the waistline like this. Okay. And then, from there, we are going to mark off 1/8 of the waist measurement. So it's interesting that we're adding 1/8 on either side of the center line, which is different than the thigh. We added 1/4 to each side of the center line. Why is that? Because when you cut out your pants pattern, the front and back leg each contribute 1/2 of the total thigh measurement. But when you cut out the legs, each waist and hip on the front and back leg account for 1/4 of the total measurement, because you'll have four sides to the waist. So you'll have, your right front, right back, left back for a full waist and hip measurement. But on the leg, the front of the leg is 1/2 the measurement and the back of the leg is 1/2 the measurement. That's why you do 1/4 on the thigh and only 1/8 on either side of center on the waist. So I'm just trying to throw out some helpful tips if you're new to drafting. That's why this is 1/8. My waist measurement is 39.5. So 1/8 of that is 4.93 blah, 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 blah. So 0.1 is like the less than the width of my Sharpie marker. So I'm just going to round up to 5. So that'll work out to be, I'm adding 1/2 inch of ease because the total measurement's 39.5. If I round up to 5 and then I do 5 times 8, that's 40. So I'm just going to go ahead and make it easy on myself and do 5 inches. So we're going to measure straight across on my waistline. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on this side. Okay, so there is my waist measurement. And remember, this is 1/8 waist. 1/8 waist. Okay, so the next step is to mark your center front line. So we're going to consider the left side of the waist straight down is going to be our center front line. So for now, what we're going to do is we're just going to take the ruler, oops, and we are going to square a line that goes all the way from the waist to the thigh line. All right, so this is going to become our center front. So for now, I'm just going to leave that in red. And I'm just going to mark that this is center front line. Now here is where I was getting screwed up when I was doing this live. And also when I was doing it the first time. You have a center front line over here. You also have a center of the leg line over here. So you have to be careful when you're reading the instructions, and if you're measuring from the center front line over, or if you're measuring from the center of the leg line in either direction, you have to make sure you pay attention to the instructions. So this is our center front line. And the next step is to measure down the leg center line, the waist to hip. So the next step is I'm going to be measuring from the center of the leg line, my waist to hip measurement. My waist to hip measurement is 7.5 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and measure down my center line like this, 7.5 inches, which is going to be right here. So we're going to square a line there as well. And again, I'm going to do this in red for right now. I'm just going to do that for now. And this is going to be my hip line. Okay. Okay, so the next step is to mark 1/4 of the hip line. Now, we are not going to do it like we did it at the thigh, where we're doing 1/4 on each side of the center line. We are going to mark the 1/4 hip measurement from the center front line. So this is where you got to be careful. You don't want to measure it from here, because then you're going to run out of paper. And that's what happened during my live when I tried to share this last week. So basically what you want to do here is you want to put your ruler right against that center front line, and you're going to do the 1/4 hip. Now my hip is 41 inches, so that means my 1/4 hip measurement is going to be 10 and 1/4. So I'm going to go ahead and mark 10 and 1/4 here. And again, no ease. There's no ease in any of these measurements. Okay, so that's my hip right there. All right, so the next thing we're going to work on is in this area over here. I'm going to zoom in because we're going to work on the front crotch curve in inseam lines. So let me just zoom in so we can really see what's happening here. Oh, that's sharp. Okay. Okay. Okay, so the first step is we are going to measure from the center front line to the left mark on the thigh line. So this is our center front line. We are going to measure from the center front line, which is still red. I didn't finalize that yet, out to the left to see how long the thigh extends past center front. So let's check that. That's 1 inch, you can see. So what you want to do here is that distance should be between 1 3/4 and 2 inches. And just so you know, if you want to draft men's pants, there are instructions for the differences as you go along here. I'm not going to talk about those in this video because I want to keep it really clear, but just know you can follow along and draft men's pants by making the simple changes in measurements as you go along here. So again, depending on your shape, it may be that it already is long enough. I mean, remember, I have a much bigger torso from waist to crotch level than I do from like my full hip to my legs are more slender. So that's why I think this is short here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to lengthen it to 1 3/4, like this. Okay, so if yours is extending past 2 inches, let's say, that's probably because your thigh measurement is bigger. Don't shorten it to 1 3/4. Leave it at whatever length you have there, because if you think about it, wherever your front crotch curve is, you have leg underneath it, right? So you don't want to shorten that back down to 1 3/4 or 2 if it's extending past that. So just leave that alone. So I've extended my thigh to 1 3/4. The next step is we're going to create a guideline to draw the front crotch. And you want to go ahead and make a line that's, well, you don't need to do a whole line, but I'm gonna here just to show you. You really just need a mark, but basically this will be my crotch level, so I just drew the whole line here. But basically you're going to draw your front crotch in this space 2 inches up. So from right here to right there. And in the book it's described as a quarter circle shape. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to use my red pen first. You know, and if you have a curve, I like my short Variform ruler for this because it does make a nice quarter here. So I'm going to go ahead and just do this for now. All right, and then I can actually, since that's looking pretty good, let me just do that in dark and blue so it matches. All right, so there's my front crotch curve. I think the 2 inch marking here and, you know, making sure this is 1 3/4 to 2 inches out from the center front is a similar guide to what we saw in the Jan Minot method, where we drew a 2 inch square and then remember we did a little diagonal to kind of guide the center of this. So I think this method is a little less specific, but again, crotch shapes change, so I'm not going to sweat it because you know you're going to have to change it anyway, most likely in the fitting. But that's your front crotch. All right, so the next step is we're going to connect the tip of the front crotch to the left side of our cuff line. Okay, and I'm going to use my long ruler to do that. So essentially, we're just going to connect the tip of the crotch to the left side of the cuff line, like this. Now notice at this point we didn't mark the knee, so we're drawing the inseam line disregarding the knee measurement. And that's just another unique thing about this method. The next step is to draw your side seam from waist to hip. And if you had already drafted the sloper, you can use that to get that shape. And I said in the beginning that there is no ease added to the front leg, but there is one exception. He does add a 1/2 inch of ease along the waistline for movement, and he refers to page 30 in the book to where the draft for the skirt sloper is. What he does is he marks along the waistline the quarter hip measurement plus a 1/2 inch. And then the difference between your waist measurement and that final measurement is where the side seam starts. So I'm going to go ahead and measure my hip. Remember my quarter hip was 10 1/4 plus a 1/2 inch is here at 10 3/4. Now the middle of that, which is 3/8, and I'm just going to go ahead and mark that here. That's where your side seam is going to start. So the side seam is going to start halfway between what your waist and your full hip plus that ease was. All right, and then the next step is to connect that to the hip line. For my draft, it's really going to be a straight line. I just want to say this is a weird shape alert. I am bigger up here than I am, you know, down at my full hip and my thighs. So you can see that this line almost angles out at the waist, because we didn't add any ease at the hip. We added a little ease there. So this is a funny shape to draw your side seam. So I simply just connected it with a straight line because I have like no curve there because the measurements are almost identical. It's more likely if you have, you know, fuller hips than your waist, or, you know, fuller shape, you would draw a curve. And I'm just gonna pretend here, just to give you an idea, let's pretend that my hip went over here to here. Let's pretend my quarter hip was over here. What you would do is you would start up here and you would create a nice curve like this. Okay, and that looks more like what I would expect a pants pattern to look like. So I'm just giving you an example of what it could look like if your hip measurement is bigger than your waist. All right, so that's my side seam from waist to hip. So from the hip, we're going to do the same thing we did from the crotch point over here. We're going to just connect the hip line down to the cuff. Let me just widen my angle. So again, I'm just going to take my long 48-inch ruler and I'm going to connect my hip line to my cuff line like this. All right, and you can see I have a very straight side seam, and that does not surprise me because of my shape. But let's draw this back over here again. I want to show you something about the thigh line. So what I want you to notice here is I cut off about 1 inch of my thigh measurement by drawing a straight line from my hip down to my cuff. If you have prominent thighs, you can continue, you know, you could continue your side seam out to here and then, you know, have it start to come in. Okay, so if you need to include that, if you have a curvy hip and a, you know, curvy thigh, just know, depending on your measurements in your draft, you might be creating something that looks more traditional. Include the entire thigh, you know, don't cut that off. In my case, I just shifted it over to the inseam because this is about how much I added over here. So just keep an eye on that. If you have a prominent thigh, don't cut this off, include it. And if you have to shape your side seam out to include it, do that. And then just connect, you know, you can just connect from the thigh line down to the cuff to give you that room if you need it. So the last step, very easy. We're just going to do our waist to knee measurement. So we have it, even though we didn't consider any measurement about that. Mine's 22 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and I am going to mark 22 inches down. And again, I'm going to use my nice big long ruler. Okay, so 22 inches is right here. All right, so now I'm going to just mark this. There's my knee. Knee. All right, that completes the front draft. Now we're going to move on to the back draft. Leg. Just shut this for a second. Back draft. You need a separate piece of paper for the back leg. So I cut my paper in half, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to pin it to my front leg, because the first step of the back draft is to trace off some of the things from the front draft. I think this is really smart because then your like waist to floor measurement will be the same, waist to knee will be the same, you know, your hem will be the same. So I think this is a smart idea. So I'm going to look through my paper, and this is why I love Sharpie marker, because I can see it through the paper. I'm just going to pin my paper to the the front leg and lining up this line right here with the center of the leg line on my front draft. And I'm just going to make sure it's nice and straight. And I'm not going to, I am not going to pin on the line because I'm going to draw that line. When you pin patterns together for tracing, you know, the inclination might need you have to put a lot of pins in there. You really only need 2 pins, and that will stop it from shifting in the horizontal and vertical direction. So I've got a pin right here out of the way, and then I'm going to turn the paper around so I could line the line up with the top edge, and I can see it's running right down the line here. I'm just going to put a second pin over here out of the way. All right, so the first step is going to be to trace we're going to trace the center leg line, the hip line, the thigh line, the knee line, and the cuff line. So I'm just going to go ahead and quickly do that. And again, having my long ruler makes it really easy for me to get a nice, quick, straight line. All right, so we did there's our center of the leg line. Now I'm going to come over here and I'm going to get my hip line. And all of these I'm going to do in red because the length of them are going to change. So I'm going to go ahead and just do my hip like this. And I'll just mark it hip. And then we're going to do our thigh. And again, I'm going to do it in red. And then we're going to do our knee and cuff. Knee and cuff down here. Okay. Excellent. Okay, so after we've done those horizontal guidelines, the next step is on the thigh line. We're going to start with the thigh line, so I'm going to advance my paper over to here. All right, so we're going to mark our actual thigh measurement next, and notice we're going to start adding ease into the draft. Front leg only had a little bit of ease at the waist. Back leg we're going to be adding ease for movement here. And the first step is we are going to take the quarter thigh measurement, which we know for me is 6 inches. We're adding 1.5 inches to each side. So we're adding 3 inches of ease to the back thigh line. And that might sound like a lot, but the way this is drafted, it's in the Bermuda Triangle area, which is where the tip of the crotch is going to be. And I always find you need more ease along that area at that level than you think you might. So 3 inches of ease on the thigh line is what we're adding, 1.5 inches on each side. So because my thigh measurement was 6 inches, we're going to do 7.5 inches on either side. So I'm just going to go ahead and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.5. And then I'm just going to do 7.5 on this side as well. All right, so this is thigh plus 1.5 inch ease. All right, thigh plus 1.5 inch ease on both sides of the center line. For men, back and forth, you're adding a little more ease. So for men, you would add 2 inches Just throwing that in there. But I think it's interesting that you can use this draft for men and he gives you the differences. So I might measure my husband later and do a man draft. I'm kind of excited to try that. So there's one thing that you have to trace through on the front leg, from the front leg, that I forgot, and it's going to come into play right now. So let me just back up here, and that's why I'm happy I didn't take the front draft out from underneath the back leg yet. You want to include a mark where the hip line and the center front line coincides. So on the hip line, I'm just going to make a mark where the center front is. So that's my center front. We need that because that's also going to be the center back. This was the center front. It's also going to be the center back mark right there. Okay, so make sure you mark that too. The reason why we need this mark is because we are going to measure from the center back hip point 1/4 of the hip measurement plus 1.5 inches. 10 1/4 plus 1.5 inches is 11 3/4 is going to go right here. So again, we're adding ease. So there's my hip. Okay, and it stops right here. Now this is going to be this little right side of the hip line. That's going to be side hip point. Side hip point is right here. Boop. Okay, the next step is where we create a pivot to add length to the center back rise. Because remember, if you look at what we have here so far, our floor to waist measurement center line is equal to the front. We know the back rise has to be longer to accommodate your behind. So like the Jan Minot method actually slashes the pattern and makes a wedge. The Don McCunn method makes a pivot. So I'm just going to use a light blue color for this. And what we're going to measure straight up from the center back hip point 1.5 inches, and then we're going to connect that to the side hip point. So along here, we're going to go up 1.5 inches, and then we're going to connect it to the side hip point. And he says to use a dotted line, so I'm going to use a dashed line here just to, show it's a different kind of thing. That's going to be my raised hip line. We're going to create a hinge over here. So I think this is kind of cool. I'm going to unpin my front and back leg. Well, before I unpin it, I'm going to unpin one side over here. I'm going to use my stiletto, the side hip point, like this. All right. And I'm going to take this other pin out. And to create the pivot, what we're going to do is we are going to pivot the pattern at the side hip so that the front line coincides with the back raised. So I'm going to take this raised line and I'm going to swing it down like this so that now it's lining up with the hip line from the front leg. So I just pushed it down. You can see I'm lining up with the hip line in the front like this. Okay, and then from there, what we're going to do is we're going to trace the center front line and waistline from the front pattern onto the back. So to hold this steady, I'm just going to put some pattern weights here. And then I'm going to trace this. And I'm going to do it in red first. And I'm going to do this waistline. Like that. Here I'm going to include my front waist, my side seam, and my full hip. All of those lines I'm including up here. So I have them as guides. So now I don't need the front leg underneath anymore. So I'm going to just move that out of the way. You know, I have to say, I think this is a pretty slick way to do it. You know, you don't have to cut anything. You're just adding that wedge there, which I think is kind of cool. All right, so the next step is we're going to draw the side seam from waist to hip. And it says here you can add darts. So he doesn't say how much dart to add. So what I would do in this instance is, you know, kind of think about, you know, what you normally have for dart size, and you're going to add that to the length of the waistline in the back, because then you're going to take it back out for darts. So this is my side seam right here. That's my side seam right now. I'm going to go ahead and add an inch past that for a 1-inch dart, because that's usually what I end up with on my pants patterns when I'm doing fitting. So it's going to go out to here. So now I'm going to just draw this in more permanently. I'm going to go ahead and draw in this. And I'm going to draw the full length of my back waist plus a 1-inch dart, puts me right here. Okay, and this was my side seam right there. If I'm adding an inch for a dart, then I think my new side seam is obviously going to be over here, and I'm going to slide the dart in. So he doesn't give you any real specific information about adding the dart, so I'm going to just, in the middle-ish of my leg, let's see, this is 11, so let's say about, I don't know, I'm going to start here, I'm going to mark, you know, a dart. And when you mark a dart, it needs to be parallel to your center back so it looks straight. So I'm going to go ahead and just mark the middle would be here. That's 5 1/4. Then I'm going to go to 5 1/4 here, make a little guide, and then that could be like the center of my dart. So I'm just drawing this in so you can see. Darts are suggestions, you know, just I'm putting it in there so you understand that this extra past my side seam is now going to be taken out over here. So this will become my new side seam. And you can see already, I'm going to have the same thing in this draft. I'm not really coming out, when I go to do my side seam, it's going to be like this. So again, it's very straight, okay? And obviously, if you have a larger hip, this will be out larger and you'll get the same kind of curve that I shared on the front leg, but that's my side seam again because I added the whole inch, making my waist measurement like bigger actually. It's a little bit bigger than my hip. That's my shape. Okay, and then we're just going to continue that down to the cuff line again like we did. And when we get down to the cuff, you'll see that he uses the same 4 inches. So his hem is the same front and back. Now normally my hems are a little bit wider in the back. We'll see. I'm just going to do it, he says. So I'm going to go ahead and mark my 4 inches for my side seam and my inseam. And then I'm going to connect this to here, and you can see I am cutting off some of that ease at the thigh. But again, for me, I think that's going to be okay. All right, so there's my side seam. You can see it looks very straight. I mean, I guess technically, you know, it could look like I have a little bit of a curve here, but really I'm kind of straight. So this is another, you know, strange shape alert with my shape being so straight and being bigger from waist to crotch, and then more slender from the bottom of my behind down to my ankles. The next step is to draw the back crotch curve, and it's the same as the front crotch curve in terms of steps. I'm going to use my red pen to connect the hip line to the thigh line, and you want to make sure that this line is parallel to your center of the leg line. And because I'm using my gridded paper, that makes it really easy for me to see that I'm straight. All right, so extending that. Whoops. Then the next step is to measure up 2 inches from the to measure 2 inches up from the thigh line. So I'm just going to go across here because this is going to be the tip of the, the top of the crotch curve. So there's my 2-inch above. And then basically you're going to create a back crotch that goes from here to the tip of the left side of the thigh. So again, you can use a curve if you want to, or you can dash it in, whatever. But basically you want to connect these. I'm just going to go with this for now. And actually let me just draw that in for reals. Like that. And then you can see here, I have this weird jog in here. So it doesn't look like that in the book. So let me just show you quickly. So see here, you're just getting a nice smooth straight line there. So I am going to just do something like this to connect it. And I'll use my light blue pen so you can see the difference here. So I'm going to go like this to this. So I'm just going to chop that little weirdness off like that. And then we won't be using this anymore. All right, so I bet you can guess what the next step is. The next step is to draw your inseam from the tip of the crotch to the left side of the cuff line here. I'm just going to connect the tip of the crotch to the cuff. All right, so now we have the inseam drawn, and basically this draft, the back leg draft, is finished. Now he does do a little fitting thing I want to show you next. He's checking the depth of the front and back leg to see if you have enough room there. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so one little technical note here. I completed the entire process of checking the depth of my pattern and changing the back crotch and redrawing the inseam without turning my table shot camera on. So I'm just going to recap that for you. It's already done, but I want to show you. The measurement, the one measurement that we haven't ever dealt with in the Jan Minot method, or in really any method of drafting that I've seen, is he uses the side leg. And what he's talking about is, and I'm going to bring in my little mini half scale. He's talking about the depth of the leg front to back. And he's using that measurement to give you a guide for the depth of the crotch, the crotch curves with your inseams put together. So from the top of each curve, he's having you, measure across. Right now I'm at 4 3/4, and I know that I'm wider than that. This is a half scale of my body, so I'm going to go ahead and see what this says. So this would be like 3.5, 3.5-ish along the side of my leg, which is 7. And that's the measurement I got by doing it this way. So clearly this is not enough depth, 4.5, if the side of my leg is about 7 inches. So I need to extend my back crotch 2 inches just to bring it up to 6 3/4. I'm going to go with that. Because again, we're kind of guessing, not guessing, but I mean, this is not an exact measurement. The way he has you do that is, he has you create a pivot down at the hem, and then you just slide it over like this. until you have the amount of depth you need at the top. And because I already did it, I'm just going to pin it here so I can show you. So I'm going to pin the paper lining up the cuff, pull it down. It allows us to spread up at the top and add that length. Okay, so that's what I did there. And then I just drafted in, let me take the pin out, then I just traced the edge to get my new inseam. You know, because we added all of that, he does mention that you can curve the inseam in the back. I'm not a fan of having a totally straight side inseam on the front and a curved inseam on the back. So I'm going to leave that alone for now. But if you do decide to curve your back inseam to remove some of that ease, you might have to lower the crotch point a little bit because a curved line is longer than a straight line. You want the front and back inseams to match. I'm not going to play with that now. I'm going to leave it the way it is. But there is one other thing he does, and I know this will be helpful to me, and it probably will be helpful to a lot of women. He has you shift the side seam back a quarter, 3/4 of an inch, meaning you're going to make your front 3/4 of an inch bigger, and you're going to make the back 3/4 of an inch smaller. And I think that's going to be helpful for the fit of mine, so I am going to do that. So basically all he's having you do here is shift this one out 3/4, like this. I'm just going to go ahead and shift, shift, shift 3/4 of an inch all the way down. Now, this is going to make the back leg more narrow, so again, that's another thing I'm going to be interested to see what happens. But basically, there is my plus 3/4 in the front. Okay. And I'm going to remove it from the back leg. So I'm going to go ahead and go in 3/4 of an inch on the back leg like this. I'm finding this really fascinating, I'm going to be honest with you. All right, so we shifted. So that's going to make the hem more narrow too. So in the back, this is no longer a thing. Just going to put some dashes in it. The universal, you can't erase it because it's pen, but you're not using that line anymore. And then in the front, we're not using this line anymore. All right, so that's the complete Don McCunn pants draft. Just like anything else, there's going to be some fitting involved. I'll play with my inseam and the width on my leg once I get it on my body. But I'm going to be very interested to see how this fits. So join me for FabFit Fridays for a deep comparison between the Don McCunn method and the Jan Minot method. But, you know, going forward, if I'm going to be teaching step-by-step drafting, I'm going to do it as an upload because something happens to my brain when I'm trying to do things live and I'm trying to look for questions and comments and keep going and all these different things. This went much smoother for me. Being able to just take my time and do this step by step for you. If you have any questions or comments about drafting a pants pattern using the Don McCunn method, please post those below and I will help you. If you're enjoying my content, consider liking and subscribing to my channel because it helps me grow. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day. And I hope you're drafting pants. Let's go. All right, bye.